Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Conversation, our series exploring the makings of our exhibitions. In this case, we're talking about Deepfakes, Art and its Double, the exhibition at EPFL Pavilions, Amplifier for Art, Science, and Society at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, EPFL Lausanne. My name is Monica Antohi. I'm communications lead with EPFL Pavilions, and today I have the honor of welcoming Christian Mio Loclair, one of our participants and collaborators for Deepfakes Art and its Double exhibition, and his extraordinary work, Helen. Christian Mio Loclair practices at the interface of artistic and scientific research using custom algorithms and data and digital devices. Mio creates sculptures and video works and installations that aim to convey the aesthetics and frictions of both human and digital identity. In his work, Mio explores the human body, organic movement, and codified nature of opposing digital processes, data-driven algorithms, and machine learning. His artworks focus on the novel aesthetics identities that derive from the interplay of mathematical and poetic research, examining both creative and societal potentials of artificial intelligence, as well as a positional myth of human versus machine. Hello, Mio, and welcome to our In Conversation series.
Thank you, Monica, for having me. Hey.
Awesome. So thanks so much for joining us today. It's a privilege to speak with you about such a pivotal work in digital art, within especially the deepfakes concept of our exhibition and the larger deepfakes concept in art. So should we just dive in? Let's introduce the audience a little bit more to who you are and what brought you to digital art.
I'm actually coming from a long way with digital and art, and it came together much later. I started as a dancer in the beginning of the 90s. As a child, I started dancing, and actually simultaneously I started coding. I felt both as interesting fields to directly start and explore and express possibilities. Both kind of felt for me like the right tool to express myself and quite fun, not necessarily starting from with a desire to to express, but maybe initially just play as a young boy, trying stuff, and um, it got over the years a little bit more serious, still playful, I think, and merged in the beginning of an end of 90s, beginning of 2000s, when I, on the one hand, became a professional dancer, and on the other hand, uh, studied computer science, media engineering, and computer interaction, and uh, then over time, dance and that I myself move or choreograph has a little vanished in my practice, and it's now more sculptural. It's more often media or prints that I'm interested to explore. Less performance actions right now going on, however you would describe them. Yeah,
But
that's
honestly, your work, Helen, looks like it's dancing constantly. So in
I,
a way, you might have stopped moving yourself, but you're moving through the installation itself. So now it makes a lot of sense.
I also do believe that um, so dance is my only art education, if you would call it that, and it is also for me still till today the highest form of poetry, and I would at least argue that my digital art works try to have tangible or poetic motion. Let's say, let's put it that way. Yes.
Awesome. Helen is one of the 21 installations in Deepfakes Art and Stubble at EPFL Pavilions. Um, I would like to play a little bit of video of that so we can actually kind of give a bit of a framework of what we're actually trying to talk about today. So that was the conversation. That was the installation that I would like to talk to you about today. It's one of your amazing works. Well, actually, they're all amazing, but this one, was picked for specifically for deep fakes. But there's a specific question that actually is bringing us back to that. So let's explore, why Helen was chosen, Helen was chosen by our creator and lead creator and director, Professor Sarah Canodyne, as representative of this idea of deepfakes. So let's explore why that is, and would you like to start with the concept of G.A.N, G.A.N?
Yeah, I couldn't really answer why Sarah picked this one. I'm of course very happy and excited about this, but it has a technological reference to what's considered deepfakes. I I'm not 100% historical sure, but I quite technically sure that deepfakes got only interesting through the technology G.A.N, GAN. And I do believe that this technology showed, I don't know, around 2013, 14 in its early examples. Today it's much more advanced. Um, what is possible when a machine would truly learn, uh, at least from my perspective. And
Super excited conversation. So let's talk about what that is.
yes, it is basically the idea. If you imagine you have a technology that is able to make Obama say something that he hasn't said, and you see a video of that, then it is
Deepfakes, proper deepfakes.
proper deepfakes, exactly. Then it works the following way. It is not a puppeteering. It doesn't work through puppeteering, which would be a classical visual effects the way we know it since Jurassic Parks. And then we would see that happening. But it is a trained system that is then also a little out of control. It is a system that looks at Barack Obama and a lot of material from this politician and then understand what makes Barack Obama, what he looks like, what his clothes looks like, what his classical environment looks like, and as it truly captures the core of what it means when Barack Obama speaks into the camera,
Yeah.
it learned it and can apply that then to new scenarios. For instance, a scenario in which he said something that he would never say. And that is a crazy sensation that will have its own field of media revolution, in my opinion, because it basically means that uh, you can't trust your eye on the flat screen
Yeah.
anymore. And
Yeah, no, that's already has been used.
e-
This technology already has been used in previous elections in the United States, and we're quite familiar with the technology, but not a lot of people are familiar with how it's happening and who creates this and machine
yeah,
learning and all of that. So
yeah. I have my own non very scientific way of describing that, but I try to explain it like that because I would like to invite people to understand the sensation and then develop their own opinion based upon understanding, but also which gives us a contemporary view about what's possible in technology. But then also, if we as a society want more of that, maybe less of that control over that, if we want to participate in it creatively or politically or economically, I think those decisions from us as a society have to be made based upon understanding. And I would like to try my best to give a brief introduction about how it works. So basically, what it is two different networks, AIs, you might call them, competing against each other. And you need to imagine one being a teacher and the other being a student. And they then have a little game. Basically, they try to trick each other. And the teacher knows it's best, and the student tries to understand and then hopefully can become uh, a generator, a generator of new images. When once he learned what the teacher basically knows. So the first thing is you need to give the teacher some data, for instance, of the faces of Barack Obama, or for instance,
His
faces of
environment.
humans, or faces of, let's say, 60,000 human faces. And then he has that data and tries to abstract what is its core. And then this teacher asks the student, could you also generate an image, please? And the student does not see the data. He just comes up with any image that looks totally random. And the teacher then says, well, that looks very different in its core principle, very noisy compared to what I do here and what I see. Please try again, right? With not much guidance. And the student has, as he has no guidance, he more or less randomly tries in every direction millions and millions of times to provide an image, and basically is asking, is that looking closer to what you were expecting? Is that looking closer to your original data set, as the student is more or less blind, if you want so?
Okay. So there's no actual feedback. It's just more no, yes, and no. That's the only feedback that the student is receiving. No
It's
direction, really. No, like, this is hot, this is cold. Like that game.
No, it has a 0 to 1, a 0.5,
Yeah,
0.6, and hands the student as he steps in one direction and sees that his number is his grade is increasing or decreasing. He knows
towards
in
one.
which, yes,
Yeah.
exactly, in which direction to improve.
Mm-hmm.
And then he continuously tries, and maybe more or less by accident, he steps into some of the right directions, gets better grades, and knows then what to improve. And he does that again very often till he comes up with, let's say, a set of outputs, a set of images that he basically mixes in that data set. Let's say he
His
created
own.
a, yes, for instance, imagine he creates his own face and puts it into the data set of the 60,000 real images. And then the student tries to trick the teacher and say, if my image looks so bad, could you find it? And when the teacher does not find it anymore, then basically the teacher becomes the first victim of deepfakes, because he can't separate anymore what's true images of humans and what's a generated image that actually comes from the student. And then we are at that edge where we say, like, now continuously, um, dear student, please show us what you learned and step through everything that you believe is in the context of the data set. Which data set? The data set that you never saw. So he stays kind of blind to that data set, and hence has truly not used the data set, but through the game with the teacher learned it.
Yeah.
What makes a human? It then is able to 60 times a second generate human faces that have never lived, because they're not from the data set, because it's a machine. The student is its own machine that has never seen a human, but still can produce human faces 60 times a second through this learning process. And to understand that is fundamentally, because it is not necessarily an algorithm. The force comes through the interplay and through the progress of learning. And hence is not, can be manipulated, yes, through the data set, can be optimized by setting the rules, the targets of
Mm.
the original game, yes,
Yep. Yep.
but it's its own mechanism that leads to context. Ah, that is what humans make. And
So
if
it's
you
kind of
then,
removed from human responses. So I mean, if you don't give it any extra input, it's kind of doing its own thing.
yes, Yes, and what is important here to say, as if there is a lot of bias going on, and that is what we are particularly also as artists are interested in, is it can easily become biased. For instance, with a data set, and you want to have a data set and want to see all possible humans, and you want to have women with short hair, they will very often turn into men because the lack of data is very small compared to women with long hair. That it means that within the range of possibility, the machine starts to cluster very biased about how a man and how a woman should look, or a man with long hair become very quickly female. And to help here, for instance, or to challenge us as a society, which
Mm,
images we provide to the machine
yeah.
can change the bias that the machine is producing. However, what's very interesting is if the machine is producing bias, is that also a chance or a mirror for us to understand how we are actually distributed and clustered and how diverse we actually act, right? So there has been, for instance, also models in which track human faces and how the color of their face and the shape of their face and how often they were imprisoned. And all of a sudden, the machine then learned that people of color have been imprisoned very often. Now, you could call that a bias, or you could call a society biased that has structured and implemented a system in which we imprisoned people of color. And hence, it becomes a beautiful mirror that is brutally honest to us, and that we can also use in order to be mad about artificial intelligence, but we could also use it in order to be mad about ourselves.
There's another layer in there that maybe we can talk a little bit about. It's the bias of data introduction. So the data that we're saying yes to this group, set of data and no to this set of data. It's we can also trigger bias in the AI, response by the data set that
I
we're
think so.
we're offering.
Yep.
So yes, massive point with the incarceration rates and the quote unquote profile for that. It's totally our laws. It's totally the years of issues we clearly had in the states about we still do about that and all the related cultural issues that come from that. But also, and removed from that is the bias that we carry with us when we're introducing the data set. That seems to be a massive issue in any sort of I don't want to call it artificial intelligence because we're not there yet. It's more augmented reality, sorry, augmented intelligence than artificial intelligence per se, because they're still building on the same data set that we're giving to them. So they're not going too much farther than that. But um, that bias there is human fault, and we're creating AIs with bias because of our own biases. So
I, I
how do
think
we get away
so.
from that?
I think so. Yeah, I, I'm very convinced about that. There's also different, very reasonable theories that disagree with what I think. They believe, for instance, it is the scientists' fault, as they are not a very diverse group.
Exactly. Good
Uh, the
point.
the
Yeah.
the way they cast, let's say, cast their data set, and
Yes.
that can be absolutely true. And the way they program, I'm actually not so sure because a programmer, for instance, wants to create a student teacher system in which the student gets very fast to a very good grade.
Hmm.
It's not the task. And if you get a a student and a code in the system that gets to exceptional good grade in exceptionally short time, then you can contribute that measurement of your skill set to the ACM library, and then you're then you have contributed to science. You actually do not even care what's in the data set. You
Uh-huh.
want to build the network that is able to compress the intelligence of the incoming data set with a very good grade and a very efficient teacher, and a very efficient student system. And you are measured by your scientific quality, how good that is, by improving those grades. Now, when it comes to
Got it.
casting data, then I do believe there could be more care on multiple steps. What is actually, how is that data generated? Yes. How is it casted and what is validated and overseen by which ethical measurements? That's quite difficult as we speak here always about 5, 6 digit data sets that has to be reviewed by an ethical expert. I'm not sure how that should work. And um, And I do believe ultimately by us as a society improving, just not creating data sets of in bias, which would be my favorite choice here. But we could also give it up to the scientists trying to improve their numbers. Maybe then they work more. I don't know what's the solution here. I have the assumption it's not the scientists that could be there, even though, and that is a different problem, that they are not very diverse, which can be which would have
Seems to be
different which
the
which would have
impact.
which would have different effects. So if you would have more diverse people, I do believe you would get uh, more diverse scientists. You would get student and teacher systems that are more efficient in producing a faster student that gets to the best grade, not necessarily um, less biased expressions of the AI, because you would improve the network. But Um, so when it comes then to deepfakes,
Yes.
it means that those technologies, and now it gets a little weird. Imagine it is trained on human faces, and it could understand what a human face is, and it's a machine. And it's, let's say, 300, 400 megabyte big. It is then trained, and it can produce endless faces. So every face, which means even though I wasn't in the data set, it could restore a place in its room of possibilities. Even though it was not trained of me, it would find me. That means in that machine is my face, but also my face already stored now in 10 years. Let's make that a little bit more extreme. The face of my unborn child in 10 years is producible by a machine that already exists. That is for me uh, quite a mind boggler. Why?
Yeah.
Imagine it's for the first time that humans are able to produce imagery, in my opinion, of machines that can produce imagery that can show you all variants of our children in the future and show you how they look uh, in every age, in every year. And that is, for me, sensational because that is not based upon the data set of the past. It is a machine that captures all the possibilities of the future.
I'm kind of speechless
Yes,
about that.
I
It's
think it's insane. But what does that mean concerning uh, da- uh, data
defect.
security and
And
copyrights? This machine that would get to produce a, an image of myself without being taught on a data set that included myself, would it be then, would I still have a copyright concerning imagery of myself? Probably not, because that image is not myself. It is just the machine thinking of someone that looks quite close to me. And that goes then also for our children. So, as a lot of people try to pixelate their faces on social media, which I appreciate, of course, it is still not necessarily important because those images are already there. They can be filled up. even though the data does not exist. Now, that has different effects concerning different uh, uh, industries in design and art, I do believe. If you look at fashion, for instance, in which we use now for this example classic fashion photography, it is possible to create those images of fashion 30 times a second, let's say. And that means that it is not necessarily efficient or that efficient anymore to shoot those, to photograph them, to book a studio, to light them, and to book the model. And then we are done with the shooting, right? But how necessary is it to design the T-shirts they wear, to estimate if that is a nice trend in in spring
Hmm.
2022 in the US, or a trend versus in Japan in 2023. Now, as I name now very different fields in within the pipeline of, let's say,
Yeah.
fashion production, I didn't name just the designers. I also named the trend forecasters, probably up to CEOs. Uh, what that means, it's a vertical technology. It's
Mm.
not something that attacks people on a different field. It is questioning the whole decision tree. And that is super powerful and is something that we should discuss. Yes.
The whole concept of being able to test the idea, because we're taking the particular case of fashion, right? You have the opportunity now to design, you know, bring it up into a virtual environment, bring up the designs into a virtual environment, which could simulate texture and colors and obviously form and everything. Have a virtual show, even a holographic show at this point, with models that have never walked your runway, on runways that don't exist, that you've created in exotic or non-exotic locations. All of that is possible, and it's a huge leap forward in terms of testing. Yes, so this would be phenomenal in terms of what you can test for, like you said, for this year, for next year, trends and all that stuff. And you can say, yes, this trend, this particular dress, this particular outfit works, has a lot of traction. We'll focus more on that. So it basically could help tremendously. Like a lot of the, not all of them, advances in technology help with this. But like you said, there's what do we do with what happens with all the models, what happens with all the all the locations, what happens with all of the work that's usually done behind the scenes for this kind of show to happen, for this kind of event to take place in the real world.
Mhm.
That's kind of, but the questions there. But yeah, so is that fake? It's not fake, right? It's not it's an actual design. It's an actual, but the fabric doesn't exist yet. The work hasn't been done yet in real life, right? So you can't go and try the dress on, basically.
You couldn't, but that would be maybe also then so in marketing or in targeted marketing, it could be efficient or more
Barely,
efficient
highly.
to produce guesses or highly intelligent mechanical digital guesses and provide them in, let's say, A/B testing, and then
A/B
find out
testing, exactly.
how people react to it, and that data that you receive back is feeded back to the machine to optimize itself as a feature, a vector
Mm,
that is, I do believe, not in the generation of imagery, but that is definitely what makes big social media mm, platforms so successful, to understand A B results and then reiterate on and progress and improve what we might like and what interests us. And it can be incredibly, I do believe, in the future, it might still take some time, accelerated through providing uh, digital taste samples. So if you think of Spotify, which has probably of a lot of people quite concrete, quite precise image of their cluster of taste,
Hmm.
um, it would definitely be possible also in sound soon to provide artificial examples and feed them and refeed them in and optimize the chances of the likelihood that you
They
enjoy
become a
them.
success.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how did that evolve from G.A.N to 3D GAN?
Actually, it's evolving quite slowly. The data set of that we have of 2D images is and how distributed it is actually among people and how common it is used among people to use 2D images versus 3D digital shapes is very different. It's not the same media and it's not approached the same way. So if you take a look at Instagram, you can directly create your own image. You can photograph whatever you want or upload your artworks, and you can directly pull some stickers on it and decorate that image. Basically, when it comes to 2D images, more or less everyone became a creator. With digital 3D shapes, that's not really the same. It's also not that we experience in digital environments real 3D shapes in interactive action. That's why we don't see movies with that necessarily need 3D geometries to be interactively explored. We see tons of 2D imagery created every day. Now, hence, 3D has not developed as much as 2D within the field of deepfakes or artificial intelligence. That is one reason. The other reason why 3D is coming very slow is that it's a little bit more complicated. So the neighborship uh, representation of a 2D image is quite easy. So I'm here and it's orange, and next to it it's black. And if we see a lot of people sitting here, we understand that this might be me. And that is through a unified whole that has a neighborship comparison. So probably we both have two dots around the center of our face. And that is not that difficult to understand, that there's a certain pattern laying out here that makes sense
Makes
with
us human. Yeah.
exactly. And 3D geometry and neighborship in 3D geometry is much more complicated to describe, as there can be holes. It can go any direction. It can have not XY relationships of a flat image, but
XYZ.
XYZ. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that is one dimension harder. Let's put it that way. So imagine in a 1000 pixel by 1000 pixel image, probably it's similar to what we have currently here, is 1 million data points, let's say, in a grayscale image. And the network has then to learn from all those images of humans in the previous example, the correlation of how that all comes together, about 1 million data points. If we would now have a three-dimensional container that also has depth, then we would have 1000 pixel, 1000 pixel, and 1000 pixel into depth to describe the whole volumetric shape, not pixel in that case, then voxel. And that is then 1000 by 1000 by 1000. And all of a sudden, 1 million decisions becomes 1 billion decisions. And that is the leap somehow between bringing in one dimension more. So it's not just from 2 to 3, it's from 1 million to 1 billion. And we found our own custom way of approaching that by working with stills of bodies, like body sculptures of human bodies in different poses. And we found a way to compress that data and reduce the complexity from 1 billion down by a big margin, let's say. And then showed, instead of faces to the teacher, showed the human body shapes. And after 2 days, it kind of looked distorted, a little like honey just melting together. And after 4 or 5 days of training, it started to look like dance. So it moved in space and was sticking together. It was really readable as a true human body that is, yeah, exploring space and continuously moving. And we felt like that at that moment we were able to actually get volumetric bodies out of more classical deepfake technologies. So we use deepfake technology, if you or G.A.N, and applied physical shapes and virtual space to it, and then could show it whatever context, human body shapes, automotive design, historical busts, etc. And it could continuously understand as good as possible the context of what makes those source data and create new sculptures and shapes. And from there on, we felt we wanted to start working on the project Helen, which is basically our idea uh, to find as many uh, data points as possible. We got them from a beautiful initiative called Scan the World that has a lot of partnerships with a lot of museums around the world, and that actually, as far as I know, hand scanned many of their famous sculptures and provided quite clean material. I think is also working with a community network that also provides sculptures. And hence we had, I don't know, 6 to 7,000 busts from the history of human art, let's say the last 5,000 years, from all over the world. And we then tried to normalize them, orient them. We did that also by hand. So partially algorithmically, partially by hand, to restructure topology of those shapes, get them all aligned. That was multiple months of work. And then trying our best in different ways to show it to the machine. Now, as that process is quite more complex to process, as the variety of sculptures is also bigger than the variety of our faces. So,
Mm.
so between the a bust from the Osterinseln looks very, very different than a bust from the Renaissance in Europe, and that is completely different imagination and the corresponding artifacts. So it is more difficult to compress what humans do, but shapes came out of it. We then trained our system on those shapes. We also had first experiments. We tried that in China. We had someone continuously producing outputs, so we basically could look at those shapes that come out, and some of them looked like females, some of them looked like young men, some of them looked like older men, and we iterated over and over till we found a sculpture in which I thought I knew who it is. I
Before you jump to that, hold on. Let's play a bit of a video on all of that movement, on the scanning part, on how did it even start to look. It's incredibly fluid, yet feels quite solid,
Mhm,
output from that. So
mhm.
bear with me while we check out that video. All right, so that was a kind of a spectacular introduction to what that movement was, what that fluid movement was in Helen. And but that's not where it stopped. It kept going into a physical sculpture. How did you choose that specific image? Why is that particular, like, you were talking about before we played the video that you kind of know who that image is. You kind of have an idea. Care to share?
I wouldn't share who it is, and I can describe
Yeah.
later why, because it's a question about authority, and I'm not sure if I am. Uh, but I watched the network for hours and days producing new sculptures, and I wanted to pick one. I wanted to pick one. Maybe that was my authority. However, it felt more like watching a quite independent system and a quite unpredictable system, and basically saying stop was probably more the work of an art director or a creative director, watching beautiful artists and picking decisions. And there was one sculpture, and very often you see we knew the data set quite well as we hand touched a lot of them. Um, you see, of course, resemblance of that in the network. So if you probably saw one kind of sculpture or direction of a sculpture or a certain topic in classical sculpturing in the data set quite often, then you know that sculpture quite well. And when the machine thought of something that looked very similar, I felt like, well, I would like to make that sculpture. That is the person I would uh, reportray from the perspective of a learning machine, and pick that one. And I just picked it. And the thing is, later we can speak about the production. When it was brought to the studio, I had um, uh, a colleague coming over, and I think he didn't saw the historical figure that I saw. And I remember that that felt not very satisfying because I felt like I did something wrong in my design process. And maybe I have, yeah, maybe it was not the right way to produce. Maybe it was not the right choice. And of
Yeah.
course, for me, the question, why does it not communicate? And if that is desired. And then I felt like, how sure are you actually that you, just like him, are actually not an authority to decide, because you just picked it believing that you see a certain historical figure.
And it
But
also, if you think about it, it's also what your data set is and what his data set is. If you think about that, he might not have that particular image in mind that you do.
exactly,
So
exactly, and it also doesn't mean, now it gets weird, that the machine thought of that figure or was inspired by that figure that I think. So I do believe, at least that I can say, that the sculpture looks down. It's a sculpture that looks down, and I had people thinking that it's a sculpture that looks up, and saw something very different and more expressive. So what I think could be the forehead was something that others felt that could be the nose, for instance, and reaching up in some kind of abstract expression. And as I try to infiltrate here, correcting observers what it should be, I felt like uh, I might not be the authority here, actually, mathematically, not even, to tell others what it is. And that led me somehow to that thought that I found very interesting, that I actually believe that I also portray that in the video, is that, um, well, if it's not me and not him, then that can have two consequences. uh, we are all equally distributed authorities about who that is now, because or,
yes, based on our
or,
data sets.
and we can have all an opinion, or it's no one. But both decisions have in common that there is no authority. And that's what I described when I said, art is in the eyes of the beholder until the artist steps into the room. And I would like to describe what that means. If I would be an art expert about contemporary art and would go with you, Monica, through a gallery and we see a famous Gerhard Richter, and then I would say like, Monica, isn't that interesting? In the beginning of 80s, Gerhard Richter started to scratch his paint from left to right, and he did so because, and then he would be like, Monica, you would be like, thank you, Mio, that is so interesting, and I would start talking and talking as I'm an authority till Gerhard Richter comes into the room. Now, how would that feel? How would that feel if you would be the art expert? It feels weird. Why? I thought art is in the eyes of the beholder until the artist steps into the room. Then not anymore. Because then everyone is very silent. Because why? Because they believe that within the inner processes of that individual, there has been an ongoing power that led to that artifact. And we believe in that connection of this creator and its creation. And we actually like it. And it works also very well on the art market because it's not necessarily only the creation that rises in its price, but through its connection to the creator, that artist also gets more interesting. Well, because we love that bond and we believe in that bond of the individual or genius that produced that individual artifact. And that comes through authority. However, and I would say that I made that artwork, but not necessarily I would be an authority that anyone needs to stop talking when I come into the room because
Very humble of you.
because I also don't know who it is.
Right, but the machine doesn't know either. You see, so it's an abstraction of humanity that you have basically freeze framed from the renders of this machine, this learning program. And is it art? Is it it's contemporary art, but is it art because you chose it, or is it art because it was creating it, and who's creating the program? Do you see the levels of of depth in conversation when it comes to talking about something as pivotal as machine learning art creation? It's not a fake. It's new art. Who do we give credit to? You see what I mean? So is the AI an entity that is going to get credit at this point? Yeah. Is it? It's your creation. It's your thought process. It's your so.
Yeah, I think it is for forbidden for me to have answers because those answers would be design and could be a solution. But I think it must be art if someone asks exactly what you just said, because you feel like you just asked a lot and you said like, okay, where should I start? It's a lot of questions. That's not my problem. I needed that. I'm very happy and I'm totally satisfied if I can um, stimulate questions that people hopefully find interesting and enrich them. And from there, again, I would leave as an authority for solutions because I don't know, uh, but I like those thoughts. I ask them myself, and whenever I ask them myself, I feel like a whole space of possibilities opens up. That is inspiring, and I feel something. That is the poetic part about it. Um, I feel something, for instance, when I see Helen. Maybe because feel something, for instance, when I see Helen. Maybe because I know the process, and it's interesting. Actually, I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting to feel anything because I was knowing the process, at least that it went through quite well, and did that 2 years, and then I just felt like, okay, it will probably then manifest itself in space, and then you see it in real space, and that might be very impressing. But it wasn't. Actually, it feels like what it is. It feels to me like a black hole. It
It feels
kind of
like a black hole.
totally, yeah. It's empty and powerful at the same time. Um, what I mean with that, so if you see Helen, you see a design. So there's two different forces that on that planet that can design things. And if it's none of those forces, it isn't there. One force that can design decisions is actually nature itself. As it moves pebbles across the beach, it will continuously shape them by the intelligence of the process itself. The other one is you making a design decision, for instance,
Mm.
feeling like you want to now stack them up to a little sculpture, those pebbles. That is another force. Now, what is the force behind that design decision when you see Helen? Is that nature or human? Now, a lot of people say, well, you still picked it.
You
And
did, right?
exactly, exactly. But if you are into design or the design processes, no matter if you made sculptures 2000 years ago and designed then everything the way you want to express yourself, or if you're part of those experts creating Budapester Schuhe or Switzerland watches, you would probably agree that design does not work like that. It is not picking, it is decisions. It's a continuously series of decisions in order to make a solution to get to lead to a process that can be also quantified with metrics. It's, in my opinion, design is not necessarily art. It has to come up with a solution and the optimal solution. Now,
But the solution is for the artist, right? It's a solution to solve what's given the artist the impulse to create, right?
absolutely,
It's not a
absolutely,
solution for everybody else. It's a solution for the creator in this.
absolutely. And um, I feel beyond a certain threshold quite passive in that design process. It didn't felt passive while setting up all that technology. And but that picking does not feel to me like the way art or design is normally done through a decision process. So I only feel very partially part of the decision of how the shape comes, how it is curved. So around the center of this body, there are some curves falling. Um, I do not really feel like I made that decision. Now,
Well,
when
there's
I'm
an affinity there, right? There's a so you made that decision because it was a you felt drawn to that particular shape,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so it responded to, like, you chose something that correlated to how you were feeling about the process, right?
Absolutely, but if I would not, with a classical sculpture, would make a decision about three curves that fall along the center, that would be a conscious process and an ongoing iterative process of improving those lines till I think they make sense with what I would like to express. All that was technically not even possible because you can't just say like, ah, those curves, but then different. No, if you go on, it will show you totally different body, and so you're kind of locked out somehow out of this
Mm.
creation process. And it would be, in my opinion at least, also difficult to claim that that was your beautiful idea, that you then protected through care. I didn't do any of that. So very often when I'm standing in front of the sculpture, I can't find the authority, not even this design decision. So I see a shape that is clearly designed, that something made a very precise decision that then got printed into marble. But I know it wasn't nature, and I know it wasn't hand shaped by a human. And that gives that whole thing some kind of
Deep
powerful emptiness. It's
black hole effect, like
uh, exactly,
like you
yeah,
said.
black hole. So very empty, but quite powerful. Yeah, to me at least.
It feels like correct, like a very powerful installation when you see it, arranged in space, and the physicality of it gives it that grounding feeling, the super powerful grounding feeling that you're basically bringing ideas and zeros and ones onto physical reality that doesn't function on ones and zeros. So that's a super powerful installation in our 21 pieces under Deepfakes, and it's got its place for sure in the exhibition. But talking about, I'm switching a little bit. Talking about museums and the future of art and heritage, and because you were talking about 6,000 sculptures that were classical sculptures that were being basically based, like that the Helen is based on. This isn't something that's copied. This is something completely new. It's not a fake either. It's new. It's brand new. Um, but where does he live? Does it live digitally? Will it live digitally? Because with all of the renderings that you're getting from this machine, you can basically continue sculpting, iteration after iteration after iteration of the beautiful, in this case, green marble, physical object. But where we where do we go from here on out, in terms of museum experience? Where do you see that in the context of machine learning and augmented reality and G.A.N?
Mhm. We are actually investigating new virtual spaces since the beginning of the pandemic, and it's a little inspired by Helen. And I would like to, however, I need to describe a little where I'm coming from and what Helen then meant to us as a physical sculpture. So, if you're a digital artist, pre-NFT, then you basically create digital art that is then presented in TV screens or printed out, and you make a snapshot of them. You could uh, possibly quite fast at producing artworks, or you have generative systems that produce 200 a second, or and all that is not a problem. But through this massive acceleration, we came already before the pandemic to a certain point where the individual snapshot, in my opinion, did not necessarily have a value. Now, through NFT, it probably got a monetizing value. I'm not sure necessarily artistic value, or that must be the future of art. Um, because how could I say that, and why should something like digital art and its corresponding mass production processes reduce the value? Um, because their timing is off concerning human ability to reflect. That is how I would call that. So there is no time, no interest in order to dig in and understand what a certain artwork is trying to process, not necessarily on social media, not on Twitter. That is not a platform to reflect, that are platforms to inform and inspire, or to sell products. That's what they're for. They are not spaces to take a deep breath and have a nice conversation, to inspire, reflect, or maybe sit on a thought for a couple of hours. That is exactly what's not the business model of those platforms.
Hmm.
And that's why they're so good in making us switch topics in seconds.
And
Uh,
yes, the
So
attention span has gotten very small.
So if you're a digital artist trying to reach out to people and get a discussion, probably your best medium is mass acceleration on Instagram or Twitter. I do believe that I not always find there a crowd to have a serious discussion. I don't even have a platform to communicate my art. Museums could be a platform, maybe beautiful galleries could be, of course, a platform. And I felt actually already before the pandemic that I feel I need to do something that remains. Well, that is the old drama of the artist, and it's it's his own mortality.
Immortality, yes.
Exactly, but I did not necessarily felt my own mortality. I felt the mortality of my artworks sitting on Instagram, and you get your account hacked, and they're just gone, and no one cares anymore, and its relationship to its potential big or small audience. They're just gone, and I felt like, what if I lose a hard drive? Those thoughts are gone. The potential of a nice discussion is gone, and those days that were once invested are also gone. And I'm not speaking just because your paintings might burn too. They
Yeah.
always felt like they always felt like what they are, electric signals, and which is a thought out there. They never felt manifested somewhere or snapshotted and recorded
Mhm.
and weighing waiting something in virtual or in real space. So you can have that thought, but I really enjoyed that idea to finally create a snapshot of thoughts and make it very heavy in space so it stays there and you can go back to that thought and touch it, especially as in digital art it's very expensive and very difficult to make to touch things. Normally you see them on the screen and that's it. Now, uh, so after 2 years of this project, that sculpture came into the room, and I was, as I said, more excited than I thought. And I wanted to share it with others, and I wanted to have a nice time with others, invite curators over, other artists over, discuss with them, get their opinion, and maybe find new inspirations through this exchange. But it wasn't possible in the pandemic, so we needed to think about ways how to get back into virtual again. And I've however came to the problem that it's a 3D shape and we have invested so much in order to express ourselves through shape. If that is the case, then I need to find a 3D virtual environment to at least introduce the shapes and the work itself of Helen, and have ever worked since then on what is on a topic that we called actually space and time, introduction to the internet. And what we mean by that is that there's between the digital world and the real world one major difference. You can't be really in the internet, and you can be in the real world, and that through two paradigms. One is space and one is time. Now, and that is also the value of those spaces. Let's say I want to have a nice time at the MoMA, then the corresponding workflow would be like this. I would fly 8 hours, that's the time, over the
To New York, yes.
to New York over the Atlantic Ocean. That is the space. And then I have maybe with you, Monica, a nice coffee while walking through through the MoMA for 2 hours and see one of the most beautiful artworks that were created in the last 100 years, uh, which are in space. And that is the value, but also the corresponding investment done in order to get there will also increase its value. It's actually the business model of MoMA that it is very inclusive and you can go there if you are there. And
Right. With
and
every physical museum, physically placed museum. Yes.
exactly, and then you can see the everyone is invited to see the Mona Lisa if you walk down that hallway in the Louvre, and if not, you don't see it ever. And then you stand in front of that giant masterpiece or not. And that game once there is the game of the real world, and the game of the digital world, the business model is exactly the opposite. Everyone, every time, everywhere can see everything. And please, as redundant as possible, without value. We just show it to you. You hopefully enjoy it and every 5 images we show you a little advertisement. And it is completely it's
Of
completely
course.
but it's completely the opposite in its very core, as space and time are the enemies of the internet. You should not stay too long with one content, and it should definitely not waste space. It would be good if it's just a little phone in your pocket. And we thought, could it be a good idea to reintroduce space and time? That means in its own paradigm, um, uh, in, invent a space in which there is an artwork and you are not there. You have to walk over, and it takes you 15 seconds, and you approach in space the artwork and maybe also others in relation to them, that they're already there, and you spend some nice time with them there. And that is what we have made actually from the very first time. It was initiated by wanting to have Helen in our own little art gallery. It was supposed to open in May 2020, but we always uh, pushed
Postponed
that,
it. Yeah.
postponed it because it got bigger and bigger. And right now, it's, in my opinion, the technically most advanced metaverse system worldwide. We did a couple of museums with it, we did some art shows with it, but we did also just totally out of scope projects. We had Angela Merkel speaking in that space, the German chancellor. We had the actor Christoph Waltz being an animal in our world, moving through guiding artists. We had the band Coldplay, completely virtual, performing worldwide. We had made trade shows and art shows, everything, more than 50 shows and a half million users across the last year. And that was a beautiful um, t- time, and it is currently growing. We have just 30 people sitting only on that project the whole time, full time. And it started with the desire to give Helen some space very organically, as we were just alone here in the studio in our first lockdown, feeling like we need to really discuss space and time, which is called today Metaverse.
I want to show a bit of a video of that and the walking through that gallery. So bear with me while we take the tour of this incredible space. So that was a quite interesting tour through the exhibition, through the exhibition space. Um, which particular artworks are there that are, and how often are you changing them, and what kind of solutions are you offering? Like, what's kind of, tell us more about it. Basically, it's quite fascinating.
We basically started with one space, and then, like, when we called it IMCA, the International Museum for Contemporary Art, we just felt like, let's go wild directly. And and especially in May 2020, we felt like, please don't call it online. That was our first thought. We just felt like, well, if it's about space and but everywhere available, then not online, but maybe international, and think of that walking across borders, but please just not with technology, because and just travel through data, but really walk with your digital avatar as far as Finland is. Then it might take that long, and felt very early like that it's might be a waste of time if we produce that and the pandemic is then only 6 months. What did we know? And
Yeah.
then just have that little project and then kill it again like any other experiment that is then just a small moment and then forgotten like yesterday's problems. And we felt that right from the beginning, we need to work very differently and think of platform. So right now it is a platform in which IMCA exists. Imagine something that you can go to, like Netflix is something you can go to, but it's not a museum. It's also not a movie. It's a platform that provides you a lot of movies for very different interests. And that is actually what the first thing that we did is thinking of its highly parallelized to coexist in multiple metaverses that can be spawned for very different topics. So the International Museum for Contemporary Art is currently closed, but it's one metaverse within our platform of metaverses, which continuously opens up different spaces for different needs, for conferences, mm, for museums, for gallery
For heritage,
shows. Excuse me?
for heritage,
There,
for preserving heritage. For example, we have the Ubisoft scan of Notre Dame de Paris
yep,
prior to the fire, and we have the Temple of Balshmere in Palmyra scan before the
yep.
destruction. Um, would this platform be something that would be able to host things like World Heritage digitized versions of World Heritage sites and World Heritage artworks?
Absolutely. So how we would do that, and that is also then the scale of invention that we would do that. It is basically we host whole clouds on servers to carry individual Unreal entities that have that data loaded. So basically, when you go on our platform, you are getting, imagine a PlayStation somewhere in Switzerland, and you can remote control it, playing it in highest quality directly through the browser. So we don't work with virtual reality or download of content. We want to work with online, which is the
With
game of the
cloud
with browser, and that the browser connects you to the cloud and then show it to you no matter on which device you are, mobile phone or a desktop computer, that you can directly walk through, yeah, Palmyra before it got destroyed, but with volumetric light and high quality materials. So
textures.
it looked, yeah, exactly, it would look quite real. So the spaces we are doing are aiming to provide highest quality visual sensations, and but what for? To at least give a sense of virtual tangibility. I don't know if that word exists. uh,
Right.
Something that is graspable and feels, I'm not saying real because that is a very subjective term, but not necessarily looks like 90s net art experiments. Yeah.
This was a fantastic and fascinating conversation,
Thank you.
and I wanted to say a huge thank you for joining us for such an engaging topic, and yeah, and would like to see what you're doing next. We'll keep up with you with what you're doing next,
Me too.
and, and hopefully you'll be able to come see the exhibition yourself, because with like we were talking about with COVID and all that stuff, it even between countries as close as Switzerland and Germany, it's still difficult to conceptualize coming that far. So that's why the idea of the International Museum of Contemporary Art sounds quite appealing in our current era. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our to our viewers as well, and we'd like to invite you all to come join us and see this installation and all the other ones within the Deepfakes Artnet's Double exhibition at EPFL Pavilions in Lausanne, Switzerland, from now basically until February 6, 2022. Yes, we're about to get into 2022 if you can believe that. But yeah, that's kind of all of we have for today, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much, Mio.
Thank you so much for your time. Ciao.
Thanks everyone, and wishing you a fantastic day from Lausanne, Switzerland. Bye.